Hello, good evening. Thank you. Greetings from Cosmos Foundations. I'm Nabila Rahman, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of Cosmos Foundation on the Cosmos Dialogue Distinguished Speaker Series on Afro-South Asia connectivity and the Habshi kingdoms of Bengal and beyond. Cosmos Foundation is always open to new ideas that can help transform society and lead to a better future, and your support along this journey is extremely important for us. Today we will commence with opening remarks from Nahar Khan, Executive Director, Cosmos Foundation, Chairman of Cosmos Foundation. The keynote address will be delivered by our distinguished speaker, Dr. Kenneth X. Robbins, activist, scholar. Panel discussions will be held by Mofidul Haq, founder, trustee, Liberation War Museum, Afsan Chaudhry, editor-at-large, UNB, Rana Haidar, author and historical researcher. Closing remarks will be given by Professor Haidar Ali Khan, John Evans, distinguished university professor, University of Denver. So without further delay, let me thank each of you again for enriching the occasion with your presence. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Nahar Khan to deliver the opening remarks and commence today's session. Thank you.
Good evening, Excellencies, distinguished discussants, and guests. It gives me much pleasure to welcome you all to what promises to be an extremely stimulating session entitled Afro-South Asia Connectivity and the Habshi Kingdoms of Bengal and Beyond. As we delve into a fascinating and even enchanting part of the history of this region, it's important to note that many of us have heard of Indians in Africa. We even have a famous example to remind us of that history today in the form of the British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. However, the movement of people across the Indian Ocean, from Africa to India, the fascinating historical exchanges in knowledge, music, art, and culture still remain quite unfamiliar to us. I think great lessons can be drawn from history of how our cultures were shaped by one another, and in many ways still continue to do so. Much thanks to the pioneering work of our distinguished speaker today, archivist scholar Dr. Kenneth Robbins, who along with his lovely wife, Joyce Robbins, have traveled all the way from Washington, D.C. to embark on their first of many trips to Bangladesh, we hope. Dr. Robbins has curated several Indian exhibits and many scholarly conferences. In addition to publishing more than 70 articles, he co-edited a 3-volume series on Afro-South Asia and the global African diaspora. These are the most comprehensive accounts in the experience of the African diaspora in South Asia, which gives us an enthralling insight on the role of Africans in shaping South Asian history and the interactions between the two communities. During an address at the U.S. Library of Congress to talk about his book, African Elites in India, Dr. Robbins said his special interest is the study of the comprehensive history of the Maharajas and other Indian princes, utilizing everything from paintings to medals. This, perhaps, is the secret of his success in uncovering so much that would otherwise have been lost to the pages of history. A voracious collector, he began collecting Rajput, Deccani, Mughal, and company school paintings sold by dealers and auction houses in the 60s. Struck by the fact that only coin collectors knew that Bengal was ruled by an East African dynasty from 1486 to 1493, he made it his life's mission to bring such information into general public discourse through exhibitions, lectures, articles, and publications that may not fit the mold of the traditional history tomes, but hold the power that make you engage with history as a subject. In fact, one of the aspects of this visit that I'm most excited about, apart from this session, thanks in no small part to the excellent panel of discussants participating today, but a real treat also awaits those who attend the accompanying exhibition at the Cosmos Garden Gallery tonight. It features a selection of items from the Kenneth and Joyce Robbins collection of South Asia history, described by people in the know as the largest collection of Indian ephemera outside of India. The collection comprises more than 100,000 items, including books, manuscripts, medals, and fine artworks, alongside unique ephemera speaking to the diverse cultures and traditions that find expression in India: Hindu, Islamic, even Bollywood. I would also like to mention that the collection made the news in October, as it was revealed that the Robinses had designated the Penn Libraries, the library system of the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League school in the US, as the recipient of their entire collection in their estate planning. The generosity on the part of the Robinses means generations of scholars will find research topics here and use this material in their teaching, which would bring such information to textbooks in schools and into general historical discussions. That, to me, is the meaning and spirit of true scholarship. I am also happy to announce that we've been working on a book and film project on Africans in Bengal, and I feel privileged and honored to have been able to work with you, Dr. Robbins. We have a truly excellent and diverse panel of discussants for today's program. Mofidul Haq is a researcher, publisher, and essayist who is one of the founder trustees of the Bangladesh Liberation War Museum, and his contribution to uncovering the real history of Bangladesh's liberation war is second to none. Rana Haider is an author with a passion for travel, whose travelogues have taken readers on journeys to far-flung lands in the Middle East and European capitals. She is also a trained sociologist whose latest book is India, Beyond the Taj and the Raj. She is also a columnist for the Dhaka Courier. Dr. Haider Ali Khan is a professor of economics at the Joseph Corbel School of International Studies at the University of Denver. He is a man who wears many hats and has written books on a wide range of subjects from history and culture to politics and poetry. Afsan Chaudhry is a historian with a special focus on the Bangladesh Liberation War, on which he has published countless volumes. He is also a columnist and journalist, whose body of work has seen him conferred with the Bangla Academy Award and the Ekushi Padok. With this, I would like to conclude my remarks and hand it over to Dr. Kenneth Robbins to deliver his keynote address. Thank you.
Well, the best thing has been meeting Nahar and her family. And I don't think in this audience I have to introduce them. You realize that you have the living embodiment of Bengal culture and the successors to the Tagores living right in this house. And I think we should all applaud what they're doing and thank them. And the meal that we had in this house was beyond belief. Every dish was different and scrumptious. And I will not forget that lunch either. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got started in this. So first slide, if you would. It's presumptuous of any sort of American to come and talk to people in Bangladesh about Muslims. Certainly people here know something about Islam and about the actual practices of Muslims. My first memory of anything about Muslims was when I was in high school and I got reprimanded by my teacher and a letter went home to my mother. Why did a letter go home to my mother? We had an exam, and a multiple choice exam, and the right answer to the question was Muslims are A, B, C, D, and the correct answer was Arabs. Well, that time, that sounded reasonable to me. But then the teacher went on to talk later about India and Pakistan, and talked about all these Muslims in Pakistan. And I pointed out that this didn't really jive, and I got in big trouble with my mother because of that. So that, I think, was my first experience with Islam. My first experiences with black people were really just limited to the maids that came to white homes. And I want to talk a little bit about how that affected me. So from that point, I've come to produce a number of books about Africans in India. And I wanted to share with you some of my recent experiences and talking about that and Muslims. And these are two of my recent books. And you see on the cover, the African Nawab of Janjira, which is an island off the coast south of Bombay. And they were put into power by another African, Malik Ambar, and ruled from the early 1600s. They bloodied the noses of the British a number of times because they were sailors and pirates. And at one point, Aurangzeb made them the chief Mughal admirals, in which case they moved on to Gujarat. And so I gave a lecture on this fellow, Ahmed Khan, the Nawab's marriage. He was married to a member of the Habshi family, who were very liberal Muslims, Muslim reformers. And at my lecture, more than a dozen members of the Habshi family came. So all of a sudden, I'm talking in front of members of the family, some of whom had very different opinions. And the interesting story about this thing is that after the Nawab died, he had been estranged from his wife. She wrote a letter to Queen Mary, which is in the British Library, which she accused him of all sorts of terrible things. And you know, Nawabs and Maharajas do not have a good reputation for good behavior. And to my shock, so far I found out either everything that she said is untrue or unproven. So I don't know what to make of that. But her brother-in-law, who was an artist, wrote a novel in the 1930s about her letter. Exactly everything she said in the letter. So this is the first feminist novel written by a Muslim man in the 1930s. And that was the subject of my talk. My most recent book is even more unusual. It's about 4 foreigners who came to South Asia, and really they all had tremendous impact on Islam. One was one of the most important associates of Darashiko, who I don't think needs any introduction. And he would lie naked on the steps of the Jama Masjid, and Aurangzeb said, "Here's a cover yourself." And he said, he held up the cover, and Aurangzeb could see the blood of all of his relatives that he killed. And according to the tradition, he was asked to say there was only one God and Muhammad is his prophet. And being a typical Sufi in the state of renunciation, he said, "There's no God." So they said, "Well, go on. And he said, "I haven't seen him yet." So they cut off his head, and the legend is that the head was picked up by the body that came running up the steps. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. The next one was a 19th century man who came to the Punjab, and even though he didn't become a Muslim himself, he is the father of the idea of the Abrahamic religions. The idea that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are really variations of the whole of one cloth. He built the first purpose-built mosque in modern Western Europe in Woking with the aid of the Begum of Bhopal. And what he said about Islam was very important because he was the first Westerner really to talk about the idea of jihad as other than some sort of fanatical warfare. Spiritual jihad. What was the meaning of spiritual jihad as the true meaning of jihad? And he also said that Islam was pure Judaism plus proselytizing and pure Christianity minus St. Paul. He put all these things together. And the last two were in Pakistan. Some of you may know the name of Muhammad Assad, who was one of the great Westerners who converted to Islam. He spent a number of years in Saudi Arabia, and later his translation of the Quran was sponsored by Sheikh Yamani. And he was also director of Islamic Reconstruction in the Punjab And he was the first citizen of Pakistan. He had the first Pakistani passport. He was also in representative of Pakistan in the United Nations. And the last one is a woman who came from New York to live with Maududi, and she was a shrill voice of the clash of civilizations. So how does somebody come to talk about these subjects and not come to a simple point? Because if you really know nothing about a subject, you should have a simple overall statement. I am an opponent of doing that because I feel when people limit themselves to one idea, they usually pick up something, and it's usually confusing. It usually is something that sounds legitimate to them, tells you more about them than about the thing. You can't talk about Islam or all Muslims without considering time, place, and various things. Next slide. So if you want to understand my collection, this is one of the earliest paintings that I was interested in. I managed to buy it. Now what's important about this painting is it allowed me to study any number of different Islam, but I still have no idea what this painting is. What I think it is a holy man, a Hindu holy man, who created a alternate universe in his mind. And the animals are in his peaceful kingdom are at his feet, and he populated his alternate universe with animals and humans grown on a tree. You can't see them very well, but they're gold. And the birds are birds sent to destroy his tapas, his meditation. So I own this painting for more than 40 years. I've studied it with every scholar. I still can't tell you whether this is a Muslim painting. By stylistically, it probably is third quarter of the 17th century. I can't tell you whether it's a Hindu painting or some sort of syncretic thing. So you can see my problem. Everything I have makes the thing more complicated and confusing to people, and people want one answer. So what is the answer that I want to give to you? That truth has many facts, and not everything is the same. And very often when a person tells you that they know the answer to something, this tells you about them, it doesn't tell you about what they're dealing with. So the topic that I wanted to cover was Muslims and Islam in South Asia. So having dealt with this painting that I just showed you, I wanted a very simple painting. I saw this painting and I fell in love with it. It's basically the same time as the other painting, basically also Deccan, but probably from Bijapur rather than Golconda. And I liked it because the patchwork cloth that he's wearing looks like it was painted by the 20th century artist Klimt. And so often I find various schools of painting have had precursors in Indian painting. So what is the shock that I have? When the inscription is read, it turns out not to be a Sufi, it turns out to be a yogi. So how could this be a yogi? So I went to various scholars of Sufism, and I found out that one of the Shatari Sufi identified the primordial yogis with the prophets recognized in Islam. And we actually found the manuscript that referred to this and equated this yogi with the prophet Yunus. Well, all prophets are one. There may be many, many prophets, but the message is one. And so really all prophets are the same. That's the story of this. So to show you how confusing this is, I then decided I would look into the Sufis of Bijapur, because this should show you about harmony and so on and so forth. And the most prominent Shatari Sufi, they pensioned him off to Mecca because he was killing all the Shias. So it wasn't what I expected, and I have to go with the data, not with what my theory is. But I love this painting. To show you how confusing this whole thing is and where we can take it, I recently purchased this painting, which has a weird inscription in it, which is somewhat unreadable, starting with Hazrat. So what is this? What is this fellow here? What does it fit with? The prophet Solomon, King Solomon, is often shown in this way as the master of the physical world and the jinns and so on and so forth, and of all the animals. And this sort of theme also comes probably from the Shahnameh, where there's a foolish king, not a King Solomon, who tries to arise to the sky by training birds to bring them up to the sky. So I still don't know if this is King Solomon, but I think it is. The importance of this is people do not realize the connections between, for example, Islam and Christianity and Judaism. Because every prophet in the Jewish Bible, I can show you a Mongol-Deccan painting of. I can show you people that nobody's ever heard of who are in the Hebrew Bible that are in Mongol-Deccan paintings. And I've covered hundreds of them. So this gives you some basis for talking about the similarity of the Abrahamic faith and overcoming some of the difficulties between the groups. Now, this is a massive bunch of Sufis. So anybody have any idea where this poster comes from? And where you will see, I don't know, do you have posters like this in Pakistan? What?
This one is from Pakistan? Maybe?
Pakistan.
It's like the tracker. It's a bit like the tracker.
Give that man a prize. So you would say, you would say this must come from India or Bangladesh and not Pakistan. Pakistan, of all places, does not have this reputation. These posters are available everywhere in Karachi and Lahore today, with everything else that is going on. And to give you some idea of where I am, one of the reasons I picked this particular one is there. Can anybody see a little guy on a tiger? He must be there somewhere. That's I think why I picked it. What lion? Yeah. If you see the lion, slightly above the lion and to the left-hand side of the lion, there's a guy riding on a tiger. This is a Sufi that I've been studying. And I want to know, first of all, if I say the name of the group, how many of you have heard of this group? His name is Shah Madar, and he was the founder of the Madhya Sufis. Does that name mean anything to you? Doesn't mean anything to anybody. But we've discovered literally hundreds of chillas all over India. The main chilla is in Mathapur near Kanpur. But supposedly, there are a lot of ones right here in Bengal. So I've been dealing with the group and the main information minister of this order, but I'm hoping that somebody will come up with some sort of scholarly source of these very related to the Madhya Sufis. And everything I buy seems to be enigmatic. This is a Deccan painting. And I'm told that it says that this is the magic bird that appeared in Egypt at the time of Jesus. I don't know if that's true. So, one of the things we see is the connection between Bengal and other places in eastern India. So, the descendants of Mir Jaffa, who turned turned in the Battle of Plassey to an ally of Clive, were known as the Waznazims of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. And the connections between the paintings in Patna and the paintings in Murshidabad are very strong. The artists went back and forth. We still don't have a comprehensive history of the paintings of Patna or Murshidabad. We have some started on Patna. This is a little bit later Mohar scene again from Patna. But I think it's a very fine example of this medium. This is, I think, the most important painting in the collection. Now, in it, we see a painting of the last Nawab of Lucknow and in Kaiserbagh. Uh, this is maybe, do I have to say who he was? It's maybe familiar to most people. He was a great one for staging dramas and musical things. And he had written all these narrative poems, like The Ocean of Affection, and so on and so forth. And he presented these things as musical plays. So you can see him being carried within this palace, and I can't tell whether the British soldiers are guarding him or keeping him prisoner. But he came to Calcutta, where he was deposed. In Calcutta, he created a whole universe of music, art, and some of you may know the zoo that he created with the reptiles. I also don't know what to make of other things. So this is a festival in a Muslim palace in the Shirabad, and it's the Holy Festival. Was that typical that Hindus were marching in Muharram, and that Muslims were celebrating Holi? Or is this atypical? And this is the whole thing with being a collector. And one of the reasons that I've taken on less paintings and more documents. Because if you have hundreds and hundreds of documents, you can begin to see there's a pattern or not a pattern. I look at this and I already in my mind, I'm saying that Muslim rulers celebrated Hindu holidays. That may not be accurate. It's maybe the one depiction of that or one particular god or something like that. Also, one of the things I notice is that we don't recognize when people have African blood. In most of the Muslim Sananas and armies, there were Africans. So here's a case where the last Nawab Nazim of Bengal kissed his wife and take his son by his African wife, who became the first Nawab of Murshidabad. So here is he and his half-African son. This is from a watch that I bought in the Altani collection, from the Altanis. You may be interested in what happened to the rest of the family, the ones he dissed, the legitimate heirs. They wound up in Pakistan, and one of them became Iskandar Mirza, whose name you may know. So now I've introduced the idea of Africans. So who are these Africans? One of the problems is I'm based in talking about the elites and the kings and so on and so forth. Were there any non-elite Africans? And as a matter of fact, there were tons of non-elite Africans all over. And I'm sure that if we look in Bengal, we're going to find the only place that I've looked that I surprisingly haven't found them has been in Kerala, where I know that they existed during the Dutch and Portuguese times. In fact, I even found a shrine to an African saint that people light candles to. They don't know his name, but they know he was an African. They don't know what religion he was, but you see Christians and Muslims both lighting candles at the shrine. Now, in Golconda had Africans, a number of Africans, and good Africans as well as other Africans. But during the 19th century, the Raja Wanpati brought in a new army of Africans, which later came to be part of the army of the Nizams. Wanpati was a part of Hyderabad. And so Africans in Hyderabad have this reputation of being very muscular and so on and so forth. And there's even an AC Guards area in Hyderabad, definitely. I'm not mentioning Hyderabad Sindh, but if I did mention Hyderabad Sindh, the person who fought the British at the time the Sindh was taken over, the chief general was Husho Muhammad Shiba, great heroine, so another African. But that was in Hyderabad, Sindh. This is a painting which I'm very, very proud of. In 1599, one of the things that the Mughals tried to do was to make the Hindus into people of the book. So they had to pick a book. They didn't pick the Vedas, although later Darashiko was interested in the Vedas. They picked the Mahabharata, the Book of Wars, and they made several of these Razinama paintings sets. This one was done by a reverse set of artists, Hindu and Muslim. And two of the paintings, one of which is in my collection, were done by Bilal Habshi, obviously in Africa. So this is a 16th century African Mughal artist. What I tried to do with the collection is also document things that are not there anymore. The last time I was at this mosque, this identification was no longer there. Is it readable? I can't tell if it is readable. What you will see that the Sidi Saeed Mosque was in fact built by an African, and he was in association with other Africans as well. This isn't the only mosque in Ahmedabad associated with Africans. It's also my favorite, which is the Sidi Bashir Mosque, of which only 2 minarets are still intact. And if you can bribe the guards, I don't know if you can do that today, but in the old days you could, and you shake one, the other one shakes. So in my first book, we had a thing about the scientific principles that allowed this amazing thing to happen. When you look at the paintings of the Mongols and the Deccan, you see Africans everywhere. If you look at the center portion of the soldiers marching at the top and the bottom, you'll see a number of African soldiers in there as well. The Africans, as a group, held much power in some of the Deccan sultanates, but not in the Mongol state, but they were there as well. They were also there in Hindu states. And you see something interesting right under the elephant. You see a guy in a red hat, right under the back of the elephant. And that red hat is a typical hat that you see for non-elite Africans. And this was the Raja was coming all the way from Kutch, which is right near Sindh, and marching his army there to get an award from the Mughals. As Nahar quite correctly said, one of the amazing things is that collectors know everything about a particular thing. For example, I can tell you certain paintings in my collection, how they wound up in the collection of another state, why they were taken, who took them, and so on and so forth. This is totally arcane information that you never have, but people collect paintings like it. So when I spoke to the numismatists about the Habshi dynasty of Bengal, the response I uniformly got was, there's no story here because everybody knows that Africans ruled Bengal. Is that common knowledge? Is there any question that they were Africans? It's very easy to make claims that somebody's an African or something like that, but clearly these were Africans. The most important African was Malik Ambar. So we studied him greatly. He was the big opponent of Jahangir, the Mughal emperor. And he came as a slave and took over the country. Very powerful and strong leader, and very good administration. There were 2 princely states that were ruled by Africans. This one, Janjira, I mentioned this fellow already. And you can see in the blue paper in the center was a castle representing the impregnable island fort, surrounded by 2 sailors, 2 African sailors, and on top of them a boat. In 1791, one of the claimants to the throne of Janjira started a new state. So this was a state near Surat, so this is in Gujarat. And this is a 1930 installation of the Nawab of Sachin. By the way, the funniest part is the capital of Sachin is Dumas, because the Nawabs, who were very educated people, decided that they should, Alexander Dumas, the writer, had partially African ancestry. So they decided to name the capital after him. He's a very handsome fellow. So this is a stamp and medal from Sachin, and it's a sample from a printer to the other states, including Hindu states and Muslim states like Bahawalpur, which is now in Pakistan. Now, one of the things that we try to do is to understand why Muslims were more forward in the early movie industry than Hindus, and that culture. So one of the earliest actresses and directors was the courtesan who was the companion of the African Nawab of Sachin. And this is their daughter, Zubaydah. Zubaydah was a very important actress. She starred in the first Indian talking movie, for example. My favorite picture of it, I just have a scan of it, I don't own it, but I would love to own it. Here is a half African woman, and she is the heroine. And they put the villain in blackface. They painted his face black to make him look darker. One of the things I've been particularly concerned about is the relationship between Bengalis and other Indians and South Asians and jazz musicians. And as you know, many of these people played together. This is one of my favorites, one of my favorite saxophone players, John Handy, playing with Ali Akbar Khan. This is, I think, one of the most important paintings in the collection. This is a painting that was probably done in late 17th century, probably 1675, something like that. It's on copper, and the only other paintings of this sort with Christian themes that I've seen came from Japan. And this is one of two such pieces, and it probably again came from the Deccanese source for the Golconda. And we know that it went to the Ethiopian royal court before 1705. So this is a thing from a Mogul court artist of a Christian theme going to the Ethiopian Empire. And now we've discovered quite a number of Indian things, from Gujarati and things and so forth, that are in Ethiopian churches that nobody had seen before. So I wanted to finish at that point by just saying to you, please understand that we don't know the history of anything. And if we think about this, we don't think of the history of Bengal, we think of the history of we don't think of Bengalis going abroad. I assure you Bengalis have gone abroad, but they're not in people's consciousness. And I think the importance of this, of what Nahar is proposing that we do, is to give a history of interactions between Africans and people of African origin and Bengal across the globe, not only in Bangladesh or in Calcutta or Murshidabad. And we know that Wajid Ali Shah brought Africans with him to Calcutta, but also in places like South Africa, where there are Bengali communities. The most important of which, we didn't have a slide, I think we have a picture of it up there. There's a picture of 4 black entertainers. One of them is in fact had a Bengali Muslim father. So this is more than 100 years ago, people coming from Bengal and settling in the United States. I want to thank you all, Joyce and I want to thank you all for the reception. We've got VVVIP treatment, but your country deserves VVVIP treatment too from your people. Thank you.
So now I would like to introduce actually Mr. Mufidul Haq, founder, trustee, Liberation War Museum, to deliver his remarks. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank Cosmos Foundation and Nahar Khan for bringing Kenneth and Joyce to Bangladesh. They are connected with Bangladesh since long. You have hardly taken a glimpse of his collection, and it dates back to the Middle Ages. But I will say that he is a great collector, and through this deliberation, we all can see that he has expressed few very striking observations, but he has raised more questions for us, questions that will lead to rereading the history, re-evaluating the past, and also look for the lost treasures. And I think this is the most important aspects of what his collection represents and what he has presented before us. And I had the privilege to visit his home in Washington, D.C., and our good friend Barbara Paz Charles, the architect and designer, she took me to the home, and I will say that that's a great moment in my life. And the vastness of his collection, the great interest that he has, I think it is unbelievable that what he has collected over the years, and also what he is looking for is not what usually people want to collect. What he is looking for is what is the people's history, what is the popular history, and how that history has been reflected in many, many different ways. I can share with you a few of these collections. He has a great collection of the film posters, and many of you who belong to my generation will remember the film The An, Mother India, and he has the original posters of Dilip Kumar, Nargis, and others, and on a lot of other things. And we, in the Liberation War Museum, I had the privilege to scan few of his photographs and collections, and these are on display. And I would say that what he has presented in the beginning, that what is Islam? And Islam is a religion, but Islam is also has a great diversity. And people embraced Islam in their own way, in many different regions. I had been once to Guinea Conakry. It is a Muslim country, and it was the Friday prayer time. And I found that in the ponds, a lot of women are bathing with their bare breast. And there is one mosque that has been established in Conakry, one beautiful mosque by the Wahhabis, by the Saudi funding, and not many people go to that mosque. And when I asked them about this particular Islam that they are practicing, they say that we are Muslims in our own way. And I think that says a lot. Bengal has embraced Islam in their own way. And that is the strength of Islam in Bengal, and that is also the strength of the Islam as a religion, the diversity, the great vast experiences that has been amalgamated. And also we have seen that how the Matsyananda, the Hindu yogi and Muslim Sufi mingles into one body. And I think that's what is Islam in Bengal also. We have our Sufi bowls who have their songs, part of which are Sufi yearning for their union with the Creator, and part of it is Krishna Lila. And still these are very much in practice here, that in the songs you will see that symbolism, that part Hindu, part Muslim, but it is not part Hindu or part Muslim. It is part of a single soul. And I think that's the greatest strength of any religion. And I am really fascinated, and I do not know how to actually explain the great ideas that he has placed before us. And I will just look into a few aspects of it is not only that Africans have came to Bengal, but Bengal is also went to Africa, and not much is known about that. And we know about in the early, I mean, late Middle Ages, when the Spaniards, the Portuguese, the Armadas we call in our local language, which is the Spanish Armada, they used to travel to Bengal and they used to pick up actually women from Bengal. And we found many depictions of that stories, the sad stories that women are picked up when they're bathing on the coastal line or on the rivers, and they're picked up by the Portuguese, by the Spaniards, and they had taken them as slaves to Europe. But when slavery was banned in Europe, the practice still continued, and they actually dumped the women in South Africa, in the Cape Town, in the Cape of Good Hope, which is used to be the travel route of the seafarers. And in South Africa, they have believed that most of the descendants of the Afrikaners, the Dutch settlers, are from the Indian women, because they were taken up as slaves, but they could not be sold in Europe, and they were dumped in African soil. So this is, I think, one connection we need to look deeper into it and see. And one of my African friends has said that if you look into the statue of the Dutch settler in Cape Town, you will identify the Bengali features, which is really something very fascinating. And in public memory also, people carry the memory of the seafaring days, and the presentation reminds me of one great play by Salim al-Din, one of the greatest playwrights of Bangladesh. He wrote a play, Shat Shauda. Hat Hauda is actually the Noakhalian term that he used, which means that 7 products, 7 commodities from 7 seas, you can say. And the sailors in the coastal Noakhali in Bengal, they carry the memory of their ancestors, and also the practice continued before the opening of the Suez Canal. Then the trade route changed. Usually it was from Bengal to Port of Eden, then it goes to Zanzibar, then to through Cape of Good Hope, Cape Town, and then to European ports, and also beyond Europe to other ports. So that play actually carries many stories from Zanzibar, from Cape Town, and also beyond, even from Rio de Janeiro, where the sailor actually, in the local language, they are speaking about Chini Ruti Pahar. I could not first understood what is Chini Ruti Pahar. Then I found that it is the Sugarloaf Mountain in Rio de Janeiro that he has rendered in his own colloquial language and colloquial and local perspective. And so these are the stories which are lost in history, and we need to retrieve and revive that. And also the connection between the jazz music and the Indian music, and reminds me of one Bengali traveler, a cyclist, who has been hailed as the good traveler of the world. He hails from Bengal, from a village in Sylhet, and nowadays there is a movement going on that his ancestral home, the local people want to preserve that. Some land grabbers have taken hold of that, and the young cyclist of Bangladesh is now rediscovering him and placed him before the nation. He is Radha Raman, and he actually cycled around the globe, through Singapore, then Japan, Korea, and also to the United States. But he also, in 1938, he has taken a tour of Africa, and he wrote profusely about his experience in the African continent. He traveled to Uganda, Kenya, and then to Nyasaland at that time, to Rhodesia, to South Africa. And that account actually also one connection between, Bengal and Africa, and he wrote very highly about the African inhabitants. He used the term Negro, that is the term that was in practice at the time, but he had high regards for their culture. He never considered them to be savage or the other way the colonialists tried to portray them. So I think the other side of the story that can be placed before us the Habshi kingdom in Bengal. And I think that's also something very fascinating, and we haven't studied it much. We just call it the Habshi rule and the Abyssinian people. And I think the colonial actually administration has wiped away the history of the Middle Age or the pre-colonial period when Bengal was a very rich land and how it was plundered. Now it is coming up in different writings, especially by William Dalrymple and others. But the Middle Age, the connection between Bengal and the other world, and also Bengal was a seafarer nation before the advent of the colonial rule. Shipbuilding was very much in practice in Bengal, and also most of the ships were the coastal shipping, but they went to China, to Penang on the eastern side, and on the other side to Eden and other ports are also part of the Bengal shipping movement. We know the story of Chad Saudagar through myths, but there were real Saudagars at that time who were actually flying across the oceans. So I think what Ken has placed before us, and he will also address the Asiatic Society of Bangladesh on 5th of January. And I welcome you all to be there. And I think that he has opened a new chapter, a new vision for us. And also, this is the value, the ideals that we fought for in our post-colonial days, I would say, but a neo-colonial rule of Pakistan, and in the struggle for independence of Bangladesh. We uphold the value of syncretism, the value of religious tolerance, and also the value of respect for all the religion. And that is rooted in Bengal, in the bauls, in the folk songs, in the history, and also in the popular psyche. And that gave us the greatest strength to establish a secular democratic republic. And I think all the historical journey that Ken presented before us, this is a new challenge for us to look deeper into the history and then see the connectivity, the journey of Bengal, journey of Bangladesh, of which we all can be proud of. Thank you, Ken, for a very fascinating presentation, and I think our minds are full and we will carry this for a long time and try to renegotiate what you have placed before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mafidul Haq. Now I would like to introduce Mr. Afsan Chaudhry, Editor-at-Large, UNB, to deliver his remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Professor Robbins and Nahar. Very interesting for me, since I did teach the subject of the university level. So for me, it's not very unfamiliar territory. I wrote an article in Bhaktapuri last week about the Habshi kingdom. And what we saw from the presentation, since I myself am an archivist, that the source materials are the critical part of the presentation. So what are the source materials? What are the nature and the character of the source materials? And they obviously are from the ruling class. So that makes source materials a particular point of discussion. What we are looking at is the ruler's source of culture, ruler's source of understanding what the culture was. And when you have paintings, when you have art, when you have even literature which is not folk literature, you realize that a particular presentation of your point of view in history, which reflects an understanding as those who are perceiving this art. And who are these people? And what I realize is what we have is a community of the ruling class. So if when you are looking at what is supposedly Muslim, you are really looking at the invaders rule. Now for Bengal, this is specific because I just submitted, finalized and finished off a document, a book which is hopefully coming out soon, which is the understanding of history of Bengal and understanding of history by rest of India. The insistence that there is one is a major problem in our history making, because we insist there is Indian history, by which all other histories are vanished and, let us say, erased. So this erasure of history is a very important aspect of any history writing. By claiming Muslim, we actually erase every other aspects of the other histories that exist. And for me, as a researcher, that is very important to recognize the multiplicity of history. So we do not have one vision of history. Now, if you talk about Muslims, who are you talking about? Those of us who have passed out in the late 60s or early 70s, we used to be taught the slave dynasty of India. So it begins with Yasuddin Balban and all others, Manometed slaves and others. In the same way, so slave dynasties, who are these slave dynasties? Coming in from central India and invading India. So for me, as a historian, if I teach in the class, I would have to say that you are really, when you are talking about Muslim history, you are talking about the invader history. So the insistence that the invader's history is my history is a major issue we in general do not deal with. We try to circumvent it, we try to ignore it, and we say, oh, they all brought Islam. But then again, if you study Islam, and I'm sure many of you have read a very significant book, is Islam and the Frontiers of Bengal by Eaton, where Eaton has, he is not a drawing room historian like Dalrymple, but more of an academic type. Eaton describes that how the agriculture influences. Now, what influences agriculture? Agriculture is influenced by many forces, but including nature. So when you realize that the earthquakes are determining so much of the history, with the river flow and agriculture. So why would suddenly people decide to switch their religion? And suddenly everyone would become whether folk Muslim or real Muslim or non-Muslim or whatever. So the economics, the role of economics in history is very important and something we have probably not explored enough. So presentation of facts about even the Habshi would say, for example, they were slaves. And one of the big erasers of history is that we basically have lived in a slave society. 20% of the population of this particular area, say what is East Bengal, were slaves. But do you realize how much that would turn out to be? In very few parts of the world where 20% of the population slaves. Now, our erasure has been that no, slavery never really existed in a big way, nothing. And we are not taught slavery in Bengal, but we are taught about the glory of Islam or glory of Hinduism or Mughals or etc., etc., etc. So you then look into Pal Empire and you don't know Shan Empire and all that. Who are these people? These people are same invaders. So the land is a continuously invaded land. In a continuously invaded land, you cannot have a history of the invaded. So what comes up is the history of the invader, supplanting the history of the invaders. And we assume this to be our history. And in my class, this is something we can discuss. But outside, in the general historiography, this doesn't come up too well. And I think this gives us an opportunity actually in the book and the interaction with Africans. Now, if you go back to a very ancient phases, if we go back to the prehistoric places, sort of prehistoric phases, you will see that Bengalis, or whatever Bengalis are, I don't know what it is a mix. And it's obvious, it's a delta. A delta will draw in people from different groups. And the biggest group are the Mongolites. So our population movement is actually from the Myanmar side. We belong to the Rai civilization group. So as Rai civilization, Myanmaris are our biggest component. We are more than 50% Mongolites, most of us. Then you can have the African group who were again travelers, so whom we call the Negritos population. Now you see the Negritos population in North Bengal. So the Negritos and the Mongoloid are mixing, and then they are sprinkling out a few other groups, and then you're producing a third population. And this mix goes on. Those of us who have had our DNA done as a research thing, you can see that you are carrying at least 16 to 17 blood groups. So other people coming in is not a new thing. In which context they came in is very important. That is what historians can establish, but historians are not ready to face many things about their own past because there is no demand for looking at things. But I found it very fascinating, and since I do teach this topic, was that the role of source materials, we can only depict one side of history by looking at a particular kind of source material. So I, as a liberation war historian of 71, I have been part of the project. We built a 15 volume of documents, which remains the fundamental document source. The main missing part is that ordinary people are not present in our history. Ordinary people have been completely erased from the history of 71. So who do we talk about? We talk about politicians, we talk about a few generals, we don't even talk about the soldiers, we talk about others. We don't even know that even in 1971, there were many forces, people fighting within Bangladesh. We do not know because source materials. So one of the reasons why I have gone so much into what people call, in my opinion, mistaken oral history, is that we should know what really did happen. So our source material as historian is very important to signify and then to explain. But look, this can only depict this historical aspect. One of the great, and this is hopefully my final thing, one of the great opportunities in studying the Habshi kingdom is to see that these Central Asians, why would they want to come to Bengal? And Bengal is too far away. Now, if you read Rajput texts, you will see that Bengali Hindus were demonized as fish eaters. Rajputs did not eat fish, and Rajputs demonized Bengali Hindus as fish eaters because Vishnu is an avatar. Fish is an avatar of Vishnu. So you think you're eating Vishnu and then farting Vishnu. It's a sin. So they were so demonized that the Mughal understanding of Bengalis, which means basically Hindus at that time, was that these were the lowest of the low. And the same group of people who were then celebrating Islam, if you will, also even when a Hindu was converted to Islam, that particular official who had converted was killed. His head was chopped off. Not because he had forcibly converted someone or anything, but he had dared to convert a Hindu who didn't deserve to be a Muslim. So we need to understand the mind of the rulers at that time. But these are the kind of things which actually trigger much thought, which hopefully people will try to understand, that your variety, your multiplicity of histories, and therefore go forward with a better understanding of what your past was. So, Professor, thank you very much.
Thank you. That was another very enlightening topic of discussion, many angles to look at. So now I would like to introduce Rana Haider, author and historical researcher, to deliver her remarks. Thank you.
I find it difficult now to address all of you following the previous speakers. There's such a wide range. I myself knew when I saw this, Nahar mentioned the topic, sort of the Habshi kingdom in Bengal, that itself was complete news to me. I never knew of an African diaspora in India, no. But the reverse, yes, I did. This is about the Asian subcontinental diaspora in East Africa. And this is my story because in the late 1960s, my father at the time was Pakistan High Commissioner Ambassador in Tanzania. And I went to school in Dar es Salaam, the capital, at the Aga Khan Boys School. That was the only school that offered A-level, advanced level at the time. So we were just a handful of girls there. Well, that wasn't satisfactory, so parents transferred us to the Loreto Convent in Masangari, Nairobi, in Kenya. And then I finished my A-level education there. So 1960s is when much of Africa got its independence. It was Tanganyika name, and there was the island of Zanzibar, and they, following independence, led by President Julius Nyerere, it became Tanzania, and we spent about the late 60s in there. So at the time, there was a massive Asian population there. Plantation owners, business, large Ismaili community, Adamjis, Karimjis, lots of friends and families. They were the Asian Indians and Pakistanis. This was pre-71. But we, even as children, mixed with. Then, following independence, many emigrated when their status quo and economic status was affected. They migrated to UK, USA, Canada. Many returned to India through following generations, and Pakistan as well. Now, again, as earlier as Nahar mentioned, it was the current British Prime Minister. His grandparents came from, one maternal came from Punjab to Tanganyika at the time, and paternal grandfather came from Gujranwala, which is now in Pakistan, and he was born in Nairobi. In the mid-90s, when my husband was Bangladesh ambassador in Cairo, we visited Ethiopia, earlier Abyssinia, and then from the Abyssinia, Habshi, the word transferred into the vocabulary as we know in Bengal. So all these decades, throughout childhood and well into adulthood, I did not know of the Habshi kingdom in Bengal. As again Nahar first mentioned, I did some reading to be able to put together some information here. And it came to my immense knowledge that Dr. Robbins, when we were at the time in the late 60s, is when you started your collecting of the Rajput, Deccan, Mughal, and East India Company artifacts. And in the process that we find, I just sitting looking behind these coins, which was the first reference to the East African dynasty, 1487 to 1494, less than 7 years of the Habshi rule in Bengal. So what I was curious and was trying to look into, only 7 years, and yet some of the reigns were very, very short. There was much infighting, murder, child murder, the regents looking after the ruler. So it only lasted 7 years. And yet it was, and I believe it was the Husseini rulers of Afghan origin who subsequently took over in Bengal. Hussein Shah. So in all of India, yet it's only in Bengal, that did this transition take place, and from slaves to sovereigns, and from slaves to sultans. So that's an image, but as Sandra mentioned, we speak about only the ruling class. We don't have the documentation. We entirely overlooked the profile of the public, of the people. And then again, as I've been doing the same homework as Nahar, I guess. I mean, it's really as recently as in October 2020, just a few months ago, that both of you have gifted to the Pennsylvania libraries the collection of your South Asian history and artifacts and documentation, and also earlier material to the Smithsonian Institute. So this is a passion of a lifetime. Something I found very interesting is that there's been a crucial difference in the transatlantic, which carried boats across the Atlantic to North America, the transatlantic slavery, and the situation of the slaves brought to India. Is the Western slavery was largely for the plantation labor, to work in the fields, cotton, fruits. But in India, it was more social mobility, and over time, many were able to join the army. They rose in the ranks. There were traders who became merchants. There were administrators who reached higher positions, and in the case of Bengal, even became rulers and free men. They gained their freedom through not being slaves. Something I point to, which I think is the first Westerners, the Portuguese, who came crossing the Arabian Sea, coming all the way across the Cape of Good Hope, Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean to the Goa coast, etc., the western coast, is that they were led by sailors and shipmasters who were Arabs, who were Muslim. Perhaps the goods and then the human cargo they carried were Indians, but they were led by also the Arabs and the local people. And that's not often mentioned in the conventional history books that we have access to. And over time, except for physical features of their African heritage, the ancestors in Andhra Pradesh, Hyderabad, the smaller I think there's a smaller population in Bengal, but there's in Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, some of it Goa, the Habshis have no connection with the African continent. And they've entirely integrated into the Indian society and part and parcel of the Indian nationality and community. I had only heard when I was working on this, my book, India Beyond the Taj and Raj, just in the Gujarat, I came across the term Siddhis. And it was just in the context of singers and dancers, and some dancing and singers. And I didn't know anything much beyond that. So when I read, looking into this topic, that was how much more widespread the whole presence was. And I just wanted to so it's been for myself, a steep learning curve, and yet it's another melting pot, a confluence of cultures in Bengal. That we are really a melting pot, and there's an immense mixture. When you earlier mentioned that we should have more, Mr. Mufidal mentioned that we should have more a Bengali presence, researchers and abroad. I came across on YouTube the Abyssinian Habshi ruler of Bengal. His presentation by one M. Ahmadullah, who's founded this Brick Lane Circle in London. He's Bangladeshi British, who moved to London in the 1970s and has a history of the University of Essex. And has gone in at length, I saw through this long video, about its documentation, research of the presence of the Abyssinians in Bengal. So that's an something current came across. And I just want to end with, there's a culinary legacy that we have been left with in Bengal, and that is the Habshi halwa. Everybody knows about, you probably all have it, and it's a particularly delight during winter. It's made of sprouted wheat, which I did not know, curdled milk, yes, of course, sugar, ghee, cardamom, saffron, and rose water. And I managed to find some, and I hope you taste it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I would like to introduce Professor Haider Ali Khan to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Brevity may or may not be the soul of wit, but more is a bore during closing remarks. So I will keep my remarks short. But certainly Nahar and Cosmos Foundation, they deserve a great deal of thanks from all of us. My gratitude to the speaker. We just met, but I already feel that we have known one another for years. So this is remarkable, and like many other things, where else but in America you find such people. And I think this new friendship with Joyce and with Ken will continue across the oceans. I also learned a great deal from the discussants, and I myself have done some research in history, so I know how difficult it is. My good friend Afsan Chaudhry was right on the mark when he talked about the difficulties of gathering source materials of various sorts and also interpreting them in the right way, because history is both an art and a science. It's both deductive and inductive, and it is a difficult balance to maintain. In the work to which we were exposed this evening, this balance has found its place. The work of a pioneer is always difficult. Rabindranath in one of his poems says, those of you who are traveling by day, please remember that I was traveling at night. To throw even some light on a subject that is so much distinguished by its by ignoring it, frankly, I think is a great achievement. History really is a gradual process of discovering the facts and interpreting them and rediscovering and reinterpreting them. So it's a continuous, endless process. And this evening we have learned from our speaker about how to use these different source materials that are available from numismatics all the way to interpretation of art and to some extent literature, as some of the other speakers also alluded to them. In my own work on Bangladesh, background to Bangladesh liberation movement that I have discussed in my most recent book, When the Earth Trembled, which is also in the subtitle has the word people's history. I think there are many parts to a people's history. The people are both an integrated concept and also in many ways differentiated because there are many strata, many groups, and I think this evening's talk should propel us towards finding both the differentiation and the integration, or what philosophers like Derrida had called deconstruction, and also what other philosophers like Foucault have called the genealogical method or genealogical process. And the literary theorist, the great literary theorist Mikhail Bakhtin, whose work I have used in my most recent book, reminds us that a novel, but he is really talking about society as a whole, has many, many voices. So it is plurivocal, and it's really a polyphony in musical terms. We were talking about jazz music just before Ken gave his brilliant talk, and I think there is a lot of improvisation as well, but this improvisation is not just rootless. It has deep roots, just as jazz has deep roots in the labors of the plantation workers and their sufferings, and originates from blues, which are definitely very direct expressions of those. Likewise, Africans and their presence in many parts of the world span the whole spectrum of human creativity and human suffering, human curiosity, human adventurousness. A lot of my work in economics is actually about Africa. And I have had many really brilliant African students with whom I have worked and keep working. And what I have learned about Africa is that not only it is the origin of humanity, which we are confirming and learning more about every day, but also it has generated a whole group of creative people, people who are inspiring in many ways. And if we remember also, and Afsan rightly points this out about origin of Bengalis, basically largely ostrich, and he used the word Mongoloid, which I don't want to use. I would call us basically ostrich people, but we are people who have been, who have also suffered a great deal and have revolted a great deal. and have also developed the painful art of synthesis through the process. And we have paid a great price for our greatest achievement politically so far, which is the creation of Bangladesh. And I think it is wonderful to have people thinking about this, especially our speaker, Ken. And I think it is also a call to duty for the rest of us to devote our life, our time, our talents, and also to train younger generation of people. I'm a teacher, so I feel this very acutely. But most of all, I want to thank warmly everyone who has been involved with this project, and I hope that the work will continue. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for your presence and participation. What an enlightening and inspiring evening it's been. I invite everybody to view the exhibit, the artworks that are presented here in the Garden Gallery. Also, please note there's going to be cocktails and dinner afterwards. So enjoy the exhibit and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.